We came to Parliament House in Edinburgh, built in the 17th century to house the old Scottish Parliament and law courts, to discuss Scotland's future with one of the architects of devolution and one of Scotland's leading political commentators.
Leslie, we're 18 months after the referendum. Is it your view that Scotland is nonetheless still on the road to independence?
Well, I think it is, because Scotland has been getting more of a sense of itself, of a Scottish way of doing things, more confidence with all the process we've been through. And then watching as the rest of the UK, especially with the Conservative government, is waltzing in the opposite direction.
I don't think there's anything inevitable about this at all. History is only inevitable after it's over. Well, what we've got is something that's evolving into what's as close as you can get to a federal arrangement in a country in which 85% of the people are in one nation. And if you look at the powers that the Scottish Parliament has, it's got more powers than a federal unit in almost any federal state. More than the Swiss, more than the Canadians. So what you can't say is it's not from looking from Edinburgh, this feels more federal than it does looking from London.
Can I ask you one thing, Jim? Does it have more borrowing powers than a local council?
Yes.
It doesn't.
Well,
our borrowing powers are really low.
No local council in Scotland or anywhere in the UK can borrow £5 billion in 1 year. So yes, it does. It has more.
But the point is surely that the powers are increasing. From next year, there'll be far more powers, not least in terms of tax. How ambitious should government be?
Well, it's ambitious to try to reflect the things that Scots have been voting for, not before Margaret Thatcher actually, which is generally in a socially democratic way. So we would, for example, I think, not want the sanctions regime that's part of the welfare reforms of the Conservative government. I'm not sure if the power will be given to undo them. If it is, then we have to manage to find the money from somewhere else with only one lever in the car working, which is income tax. Now you'll notice that George Osborne, even though he has a deficit, has not put up income tax to deal with it because it's a toxic tax on its own. That's the main one we've got to play with, and that's why I don't think the bundle we've been given adds up to a car.
Well, I don't think I agree with that. First of all, I accept what Leslie says, that income tax is a hard tax to raise. But what's interesting is that Mr Osborne wants to cut it, and actually the Scottish Government seem to want to go along with that for the most part.
Is that right, Leslie?
I don't think they've made it clear. I think at the moment they're not wanting to, I would be critical of this too. Before a Scottish election, we should be having frank discussions about what you intend to do. But at the moment, there's a bit of a don't rock the boat mode for the Scottish Government. They've only got it to lose. Everyone assumes they'll win big time. So why should they open that debate out? For the good of Scotland, it needs to happen.
If they did believe in a more socially democratic future, then they would use the tax powers they've got.
Jim, given your role right at the start of this devolution journey back in '99, are there things that you would have done differently given what's happened in the meantime?
I think the thing that should have been done differently is that the Scottish Parliament should have had more tax powers at the start. A body which simply spends money and doesn't raise it isn't really a proper government.
With each iteration of an attempt to try and solve the Scottish problem, the legislators have been behind the curve. That's been true at the beginning with the Scotland Bill. It's generally true, and I just wish that somewhere along the line British politicians had seen the opportunity that was presented for the whole of the UK by beginning to think more systematically about federalism.
So to conclude, Jim, where do you think Scotland will be in 5 years' time?
I'm rather disappointed that we won't be more different than I think we will be. I think the record is that the Scottish Parliament, under all parties to be fair, has been a cautious and rather conservative body. And in the next 5 years, it will still be that. Because I don't think anyone in government has the incentive to do the radical thing, particularly if your long-term aim is constitutional change. You don't want to rock the boat on the way. But if you're never going to reach that aim, at some point you're going to have to face up to the choices that you have.
And Leslie, your sense of where Scotland will be in 5 years?
Well, it so depends on the European referendum. I mean, if we do end up in this situation of the UK voting to leave but Scotland voting to stay in, that does look like a pretty healthy trigger for a reassessment of whether Scotland really fits anymore within that kind of UK. So it's hard to answer it now because that's looming so large over us.